When a self-driving Tesla crashes, who is responsible? Is it the algorithm that made the mistake? Is it the person behind the wheel? Or is it the programmer who designed the algorithm? Well, the legal answer is quite simple. At the moment, the driver is always held responsible. The more philosophical question of responsibility is more complicated. Drivers usually do not notice in time that they should intervene, and so cannot practically resume control over the car before a crash happens. It can take 10 to 15 seconds to figure out what is going on and what needs to happen if you haven't been paying attention. Far too long a time when you're supposed to be driving a car. And as we'll see in a moment, that lack of effective control makes it difficult to attribute the responsibility for mistakes. First, however, it's important to be clear about the kinds of responsibility we're talking about here. Roughly speaking, we can look at it in two ways. Either as forward-looking responsibility, where someone is responsible to ensure that something will happen, or as backward-looking responsibility, where someone can be held responsible for something that has gone wrong. We'll look at the backward-looking notion of responsibility here, as it's the more difficult one of the two to pin down when AI is used. The reason for that is that backward-looking responsibility is usually thought to come with a few preconditions. First, whoever is held responsible has to have the capacity for moral agency. While that can sound intimidating, in practice this means that computers cannot be held responsible because they aren't appropriately aware of the effects of their actions. So, a computer might be causally involved, the second precondition for responsibility, but that by itself isn't enough to blame the algorithm. It has to be a person, and for backward-looking responsibility, it has to be a person who is involved in something that went wrong. Yet, the type of involvement is where matters get complicated. When AI systems make fully autonomous decisions without human intervention, it's clear that the person responsible has to be a mixture of who developed it and who decided to use it for that task. However, in the more common scenario that a person is advised by or interacts with an algorithm, it's less clear. Imagine being in the situation where you have to make a decision in a short amount of time, but all you see is the advice from the algorithm. Of course, you'll do whatever the AI tells you to, especially if you've been instructed to make use of it. In such a scenario, a person is still causally involved. After all, you make the final decision, but the involvement is very minimal. You lack the time and information to spot mistakes made by the algorithm and to engage in critical thinking about the AI's outputs. That means that it's not very plausible that you are responsible for the outcomes here, and usually also entails a gap in the accountability of the decisions. Nobody will be able to tell afterwards why the decision was made exactly other than that the algorithm advised it. The same basic setup occurs in self-driving cars, where drivers don't need to do anything themselves, and so get distracted from the task at hand, because we're bad at monitoring a process that works well most of the time, and so, as a result, won't manage to intervene on the rare occasions that it's necessary. This is where the gaps in accountability, and according to some also in responsibility, come from. They can be purely technical, when there's just no way for a person to explain why something went wrong because the AI isn't sufficiently explainable. Or they can be socio-technical, when there's a person who in theory can explain the decision and could have intervened, but in practice wasn't able to. This socio-technical gap is what happens in Teslas. Finally, however, there's a third option, an institutional accountability gap, where the rules that have been set are so strict that people won't intervene even if they would be able to. In the US, this was the case with NarcScare, an algorithm that predicts the risk of opioid addiction in patients. The rules there threaten doctors with legal prosecution if they don't demonstrably use and follow the system, and as a result, they are very hesitant to dissent from the system, even when they are of the opinion that it's wrong. Responsibility, briefly put, is thus complicated by the introduction of autonomous AI systems. We can't make the algorithms responsible, and at the same time, it's harder to point the finger to people involved. To try to remedy that situation, we can look at the notion of control, as only when a person has control over the outcome do we tend to think that that person is responsible. Sometimes that's the person deciding to use an algorithm, as there is a great measure of control over the outcomes, but ideally we want the person making the individual decision to be in control over the process. Getting there is a challenge, which is ultimately that of assigning the right roles to people and to algorithms. Monitoring a system is usually not the right option, and so we'll need to find other solutions. For in the end, we remain responsible for whatever happens.